And joining us now, John Manley, Canada's former Foreign Minister, former Deputy Prime Minister, and Chair of the Independent Panel on Canada's future role in Afghanistan. Welcome to TVO.
Thank you, Steve.
It's good to have you here. Let me start by sharing with you and our viewers an excerpt from your report. Key recommendation: Canada's military mission in Kandahar should be conditionally extended beyond February 2009. The extension to be expressly contingent on the deployment of additional troops by one or more ISAF, that's International Security Assistance Force countries, to Kandahar province. This added deployment should consist of a battle group of about 1,000 soldiers to reinforce ISAF's clear, hold, and develop strategy in Kandahar and to accelerate training of Afghan army and police units. Why do you think 1,000 more troops will improve the situation in Afghanistan?
First of all, it's the situation in Kandahar province where the Canadians are, and we're looking for 1,000 troops there. Secondly, it's what NATO has said in the past is required. Thirdly, it is consistent with many of the experts that we consulted in Afghanistan and about Afghanistan. Fourthly, when we were there, some of the things that we learned included the fact that with the number of troops we currently have, which is Canada's with 2,500, of whom just over 1,000 are in the combat role that a battle group would employ. So effectively, we're asking for a doubling of that. With that number, this clear, hold, and develop strategy, which is what we're attempting to do in Afghanistan, is very difficult to maintain. And so you've got an approach where we clear, hold, and then have to go back and clear and hold again. And secondly, we don't have enough troops to properly monitor, to some degree at least, the influx of insurgents from Pakistan across the border.
But 1,000 doesn't sound like a very big number. Well, why do you think 1,000 is going to get the job done?
It's twice as many as we've got now, first of all.
Some would argue we don't have enough now.
Well, we don't. We need at least to double them. So, you know, I mean, could there be more? I don't think there is a military person, at least not a commander on earth, who ever has enough equipment, enough soldiers, enough everything. So you'll always get requests for more. But the view that we felt we heard most consistently from the experts was that 1,000 would make a very substantial difference. What we're trying to do here is shift the balance to one where we can say the likelihood of success in this mission for the Canadian troops is reasonable.
Now, as a former cabinet minister, you were in the business of asking and then crossing fingers and seeing if you get. What would you rate the chances that Canada's NATO allies are going to listen to this request?
I actually am quite optimistic about it. We certainly didn't impose the condition believing that this was a kind of poison pill that NATO would not be able to cough up, and therefore that would be our exit. First of all, that would still raise some of the concerns we had about an early departure. Secondly, it could be a devastating blow to NATO. But for that reason, that latter reason alone, we think that we have produced a report which speaks truth to those in power in NATO, and which is going to require them to take a very serious look. I think there's a lot of self-delusion in some NATO capitals about what's actually happening.
Names. Which NATO capitals?
Well, we know that, first of all, we know that we have 39 countries in ISAF. There are only 26 countries in NATO. So we've actually got more countries than there are NATO countries. But we know that many of these countries either are in relatively docile areas, and you can think of the Germans, you can think of the French, you can think of others that are in those areas, or have what they call caveats on what they're prepared to do. They don't go on patrol, they don't go out at night, they don't engage in this or they don't engage in that. And that's no way to run a war. I mean, General Eisenhower did not face that when he was preparing for D-Day. They sent soldiers where they needed to go. And what we're saying is, yeah, things may be going pretty well up in Balk, where the Germans are. It's, as they call in security parlance, they say it's very permissive up there. And I'm sure many people back home think things are going quite well, therefore. And we're putting up our hands and saying, this mission, not just Kandahar, this mission could fail unless a different approach is taken.
Why did you not recommend moving our troops to a less dangerous region, or in fact getting out more immediately altogether?
Well, let's deal with the first one first. First of all, we have invested a lot of time and effort in Kandahar province. It is the key province. Everyone told us Kandahar is key to Afghanistan. It's the heartland of the Taliban. It's the place where, could they take it over, the Taliban would set up a provisional government and begin to organize to take the rest of the country. So it's a key region. We've spent now 2 years there. We have gained an immense amount of intelligence about Kandahar. Our people know the leadership. They know the elders. We've built networks. We've built networks, including translators that are able to help us in dealing with the local conditions.
So you don't want
we have a sunk cost that is very significant in Kandahar province. To go somewhere else, start over.
Risk.
The foundation would be totally wasted, and it just doesn't make any sense. Where can we be most effective in Afghanistan? In Kandahar, because that's what we've learned how to do.
And getting out altogether, which obviously many in this country would hope for?
Many implications to that, Steve. And first of all, looking at the basis for why we're even there. This is a United Nations mission. It is coordinated by NATO. It is at the request of the democratically elected government of Afghanistan, and it's in aid of some of the most the poorest people on earth. Now, we're a rich G8 country. Increasingly, UN missions are going to deal with countries that are failed or failing, that put at risk regional or global security. If we're not going to do this mission, just exactly what mission would we do? We saw at the lead, the excerpt from Prime Minister Chrétien, when he announced our decision not to go to Iraq. Our rationale was it was not authorized by the Security Council of the United Nations. This one is.
Well, we know Jean Chrétien's successor, Paul Martin, said to Rick Hillier, don't get me in too deep in Afghanistan because I want to save troops for places like Darfur, which he cared more about. So if we didn't plant our flag here, maybe we could have planted it somewhere else.
Maybe we could have, but we didn't. And furthermore, in Darfur, we don't have a government, a local government, the government of Sudan, wanting us there. Mm-hmm. And secondly, if what really upsets us, which I suspect down below the surface is what it is that we're taking casualties. You know, I'm here to tell you, Steve, if we went to Darfur, we'd be taking casualties. So, you know, I'd love it if it were easy, you know. Unfortunately, we're now living in a world which is becoming increasingly dangerous and inhospitable. And we're a country that is going to have to play a role in trying to address some of those problems. And here we are. Furthermore, and then finally, about Kandahar, and I know you talked to Janice Stein, I'm sure she told you some of this. We actually asked for Kandahar. We asked for it. As far as NATO is concerned, Canada didn't sort of get dragged into Kandahar, oh, too bad, it's, you know, and we reluctantly skulked off to the south. We put up our hands and said, we'll do Kandahar, thank you.
She's going to tell us later in the program why we did that. That's another story. You were there, you would remember, but anyway.
Actually, I wasn't there then. But
had you left by then?
I'd left by then.
Okay. Let's do another excerpt from your independent panel report. Canada's civilian reconstruction and development engagement in Afghanistan should concentrate more on aid that will directly benefit the Afghan people, you write. This calls for more emphasis on project assistance, including at least one signature project, a hospital, for example, or a major irrigation project identified with Canada and led by Canadians. What are we doing wrong in terms of development right now?
Well, let me start by saying we're doing a lot of things right. There's a lot of good things that are happening there. Canada's aid, the vast bulk of it, as we say in our report, goes either bilaterally through the government of Afghanistan or through UN or other agencies or through NGOs that are on the ground in Afghanistan. Secondly, what I would say is that we have a good reputation as suppliers of aid. We don't try to dictate to Afghans what they should be doing. However, one of the things that we saw in Kandahar province itself was that this strategy, clear, hold, develop, that I mentioned, that phase of develop is just too slow. And what we found is there's a lot of bottlenecks in the system. It's much easier for CETA, and quite frankly, some of this has to do with rules in Ottawa, not anything out in the field, but it's much easier to write a check to UNICEF or to the Aga Khan Foundation than it is to actually go out and do a project in Kandahar City. We don't think you should put all your aid into Kandahar, but our soldiers are dying there. And we want the people of that area to link the presence of our soldiers with tangible improvements in their lives, whether it's electricity or roads or water so they can irrigate their little garden plots. We want them to say, things are getting better, and we see those connections.
Well, recently we had Graham Smith in here, who's the Globe and Mail reporter over there. He's been there, I don't know, 10 or 11 times or something. He's there right now. We asked him about this, about Canadian development projects and how they are viewed by the Afghan people. Look at this monitor over my shoulder, and here's what he had to say. Roll tape.
One of the real problems now, and it's being acknowledged, that the foreigners have in Afghanistan is that they've tried to do too much.
Does that mean that they don't want the Canadians, what, doing any military? They'd rather just have them doing reconstruction, or how does it divide up?
Well, in fact, it's just the opposite. They'd rather have them do just the military, and leave the decision about whether to build a girls' school up to the village rather than up to some some Westerner with big ideas about the role of women in Afghanistan.
Is he right about that?
To some degree, he is. In fact, when we were in Kandahar and also when we were in Mazar-e-Sharif, we met with groups of elders and the local shuras to hear from them and to talk to them about some of the issues that they're confronting. But it comes back to the same point. What the people need to see progress where they live. And absolutely right, we shouldn't be trying to dictate to them what they require or build models that they don't recognize. But we do need to focus on being more agile and more flexible in getting them to the point where they can get the things that they need. And I think we need to find the right balance in that.
Let me read you another excerpt from, this is something Arthur Kent wrote in Policy Options last summer. It goes like this: the Harper government has allowed itself to become trapped into providing public relations cover for a Kabul regime that is desperately in need of a complete overhaul. Canadian diplomats and civil servants have been reduced to two main functions: making excuses for the regime's failures and lowering expectations for the future. We put this in here because on our website, tvo.org, we've had many viewers come in and actually debate the issue of whether the Karzai government is a legitimate, democratically elected government. Is this a government that you think Canadians should be proud to support?
I think we're pretty clear in our report that we were very concerned with the degree of corruption that we heard about from many, many sources in the Karzai government. I think President Karzai, who was very gracious to meet us, is one of the many people who will hear about our report and not be terribly happy with what he learns. However, is it democratically elected? Yes, it is. And Afghans, both in electing the president and electing their parliament, many of them took great personal risk to go out and vote, something that would be totally alien to Canadians who we have, as you know, we have trouble urging them to vote even in ideal conditions. What should our expectations be? How reasonable should they be? I'd put it this way. We came into a country that was probably, you'd have recognized it in the 16th century. Now, if you went to, Britain in the 16th century and patched together a government, you think you might have had some warlordism and some corruption and this kind of thing.
Just a bit.
Well, this is what we're working with. And we have to, I think we have to be really demanding in terms of accountability of Karzai and his ministries to deal with some of the corruption that's going on, particularly the kind of toll gating that happens just to get simple permits to do a business. On the other hand, if we think we're going to eliminate nepotism in Afghanistan, you know, we're looking at it very much through Western eyes.
I don't think anybody expects that we're going to have the same standards over there that we've had here and had 130 years to develop. Having said that, you know, we've had people on the website say this is nothing but a puppet dictator installed by foreign powers. Would you react to that appellation?
Well, I guess you've always got to say, okay, then what exactly would you do? You had an election, and there are candidates gearing up to run against President Karzai in 2009. So would we say, well, I mean, would we remove him? Would we just pull all of the forces out and let it revert to civil war and chaos? You know, there aren't a lot of great choices here. I mean, we've had an unpleasant history in the past of some Western governments propping up governments that were not elected.
You don't think this is one of those cases?
This is not one of those. This guy, he has many flaws, as we all do, and he has many shortcomings, and he's trying to do a task that most people on the planet would probably say is impossible. So is he ideal? No, he's not. But on the other hand, he is elected. Sometimes democracy is inconvenient, as all those of us that have plied the trade often know.
Indeed. Let's play another clip from Graham Smith here on the tribal nature of Afghanistan, which I'm sure you saw on your trips there. Roll tape, please, Michael.
We are in a tribal war. We have chosen sides in an ancient blood feud that has been going on throughout the generations. And we need to understand that, and we need to try to mitigate the damage of that decision.
Again, do you agree with his analysis of that?
It's a very complex society, absolutely. The attempt to try to build institutions that are genuinely Afghan institutions that bridge some of these tribal divisions is a real one, and I'm convinced that it's an appropriate step. For example, the Afghan National Army, which now numbers about 50,000 people, is specifically targeted at building across tribal barriers. Is this easy? Oh no, I mean, Graham Smith is exactly right. I mean, Graham Smith knows a lot more about Afghanistan than I can, because he's actually gone out and, you know, outside the wire, as they say. He didn't go out with close personal protection like I and my panel were obliged to do. He's gone out and mingled with the people. Well, he's got it. He raises a very. But this is what we're dealing with. This is a very complicated tribal society. And again, the choice is: do we just leave it?
No, but his suggestion is that we've got into the middle of this centuries-old blood feud here, and that our approach may not be the right one. That's the suggestion.
Well, no, he said we've chosen sides and we have to now make the best of it. I mean, I'm not sure that we chose sides. There are some who say, well, what you've got actually going on here is a Pashtun civil war between the Karzai Pashtun and the Taliban Pashtun. But there are a lot of other ingredients to this. And if you read the history of the 1990s in Afghanistan, you recognize that this is somewhere which, you know, if Canadians think we should have done something more in Rwanda, well, we should have done something more there too. There was essentially an ethnic cleansing going on in the central region of the country, where the Hazaras were being cleansed by the Pashtun. You had the conflicts of Tajiks and Uzbeks together with the Pashtun in the north. It is a difficult, complicated situation. I don't think that, however, is reason for us to say, oh my gosh, we can't do anything about it.
Fair enough, but I wonder if it's been made more difficult. And well, you suggested may have been in your report, in terms of trying to communicate what our job is back here at home. And let me read an excerpt from your panel report on this. This new Canadian policy approach should include a rebalancing of the government's communications with Canadians about our activities in Afghanistan, providing more information and analysis on the diplomatic and reconstruction development dimensions. Who's blown the communications effort on this file?
Well, what we found, Steve, was that the Department of National Defense seems to have quite a lot of freedom in speaking with the media, informing the media. They have a big communications operation. The civilian side of it, whether you look at Department of Foreign Affairs or at CETA that are dealing with the diplomacy and the development, their spokesmen are basically not able, without advance clearance on whatever they're going to say, and without the threat that if they get something wrong, they're going to be in real trouble.
It's basically a gag
to communicate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the best example of, I think, of in this kind of conflict situation of effective communications occurred during the Kosovar operations that we had a number of years ago, where you had frequent and regular on-the-record briefings by National Defense and by Foreign Affairs, by officials. And you had a much more balanced presentation of what was going on. That hasn't been happening in the case of Afghanistan. We really think it's a deficiency.
Even Canadians who support this mission, I think, want to know when our participation there ought to be over. And you've concluded your report by saying that the mission in Kandahar should end, quote, when the Afghan National Army is ready to provide security in Kandahar province. You got to guess when that might be?
Not specifically. I mean, we've tried to say this is mission. This is function-oriented rather than temporal. I mean, we can't say. What we can say is progress is rapid. Recruitment in the Afghan National Army is progressing at the rate of about 2,000 a month. They're now, as I say, at a strength of about 50,000. 6 years ago, when I was there, it was zero. You know, you had militias, most of which have now been disarmed or effectively disarmed.
What are we looking at?
So,
are we closer to 1, 5, 10, 20?
Well, clearly we're not 1 year away, or we wouldn't say that you need to stay beyond 2009. Some of those are not answerables in the sense that you got to predict a whole lot of variables that come to play in this, and it's not just the Army; it's also the police. But we're saying, look, you know, this makes no sense to try to pick a date. You know, or we'll be right back in the same, you know, we'll have to reconstitute the panel to go back in 2 years' time and do it again. That just doesn't make sense. I mean, we are, and the other thing to remember is we're not the Soviets. We're not trying to take over this country. We're actually trying to turn the country back to the Afghans. This is something that actually can be benchmarked and followed carefully. But you've got to have a commitment to get it done.
Your panel urges Prime Minister Harper to engage in, quote, concerted diplomatic action to establish clearer, more comprehensive strategies and better coordination of the overall effort in Afghanistan by the international community, Afghan authorities, and other governments in the region. This is, it's not meant to sound like a Canadian insecurity type of question, but how much influence does Canada really have in order to bring its diplomatic and / military will to bear?
Well, you know, we used to like to say that we punch above our weight in the world. And
people don't say that so much anymore.
I'm here to tell you I was the foreign minister, and I regret to say it wasn't really the case anymore. In this case, what I experienced is that in Afghanistan, people listen to Canadians. We have actually made the investment that's necessary to give us credibility. This one, we can speak on with authority. We can make a difference here. Not so everything else in the world, but on this one, we've got credibility. And I think if the Prime Minister, I mean, my hope is the Prime Minister's on the phone already with his counterparts. We're not asking him to do megaphone diplomacy. In fact, some of the ministerial efforts to name and shame have not been particularly effective. But we do need him to use his personal relationships with other NATO heads of government, with the Secretary General of NATO, with the Secretary General of the United Nations, to say there are things that have to be done here, or this mission is going to fail.
You did leave, we've talked earlier about how you left public life before some of the decisions around Afghanistan were made, but remind me now, were you at the table when the initial decision to go in for the 6 months was made?
Yes.
You were part of that decision. In hindsight, good decision or bad decision?
Oh, it was a good decision. It was a decision that was taken shortly after 9/11.
But it's a decision that set us on a path to make
No, it set us on a path. But on the other hand, you had every organization of which we were a member in the world, not just the UN, not just NATO, but Organization of American States. I mean, APEC. I mean, every club that we're a member of was passing resolutions on the need to respond to Al-Qaeda's attack.
Okay, so that was an easier call. How about the next call to go in to Kandahar and stay for many, many years.
Well,
you weren't there for that one.
I was not there for that one, and I don't know all the circumstances around it. But I think, as Janice Stein's book is entitled "The Unexpected War," I think things developed that probably nobody anticipated, and perhaps they could not have anticipated. There was a general belief that the Taliban had been defeated. They hadn't been defeated. Their government fell, and they scattered, and they regrouped, and they rearmed, and there's money flowing to them from Arab states in the Gulf and elsewhere, and they're a serious threat. You also have to remember, when we went in initially, we weren't even particularly going in to overthrow the government. We were going in to disable Al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. The collapse of the government in Afghanistan that followed November, December 2001 was somewhat unexpected.
Let me spend a couple of minutes here on you as the chair of this outfit. I suspect you've seen some of this over the last couple of days. People wondered why you got the call to be the chair of this thing. You're not a conservative, you're not a best friend of Stephen Harper's or anything like that. But somebody observed the following that you wrote in Policy Options magazine back in October of 2007. Let me just read a brief excerpt of it. You wrote, "Whenever we asked Afghans what they thought ISAF or Canada should do, they did not hesitate to say that we must stay. Without the presence of the international forces, chaos would surely ensue." Fast forward to January 2008, and here's what you wrote in the independent panel report. "Whenever we asked Afghans what they thought ISAF or Canada should do, there was never any hesitation. We want you to stay, we need you to stay. Without the presence of international security forces, they said, chaos would surely ensue." Michael Byers observed in the Globe and Mail yesterday, Scott Ross, a blogger, pointed out that these two expressions are pretty close together. So it's called the Independent Panel on Canada's future role in Afghanistan. But the question is, you pretty much made up your mind. I guess this isn't so much a question as an observation some are making. You had pretty much made up your mind about what to recommend before you were asked to write the report, right?
No.
Well, then why are those two statements so similar?
Because the observations were the same. I mean, read the last chapter of Janice Stein's book, where she reports on actually one of the meetings where the first conclusion came from. But well, I kept asking the same questions. Is it really surprising that I kept getting the same answers? You know, I mean, now, on what should the recommendations be, I mean, I think in some ways, based on my first visit, it was actually my first long visit. I've made 3 trips to Afghanistan, one as minister in 2002, and then in May of 2007, I was there with Janice Stein, and then I was back with the panel. Now, it may have even been a bit presumptuous of me to write for Policy Options on the basis of my first visit, but I was asked to do it from a development perspective. If you look at the article, it's got a couple of key things. One is you can't have development without security. You can't have security without development. These are not, I regret to say, Nobel Prize-winning observations.
But it's reasonable to assume the PM had read that Policy Options, or someone had, and therefore said, Manley might be a good guy to do this. He's pretty much on the same page as us.
You know what? Actually, when they approached me, and it came through the clerk of the Privy Council, I said, I better send you a copy of something I've written because you should know about it.
So they did know about it, okay.
Well, they knew about it
after
they'd already asked me to do the job,
okay.
But I wanted to ensure that they knew about it. And quite frankly, I mean, you can ask other panel members, but we really wrestled with a question which I was in no way prepared to address before I started this, which is, when you're going to put your young men and women in harm's way, what are the considerations and how do you balance that price against the likely output? I have no hesitation saying and I think the conclusion of my article on Policy Options is, don't withdraw too easily. Let's think about this. But as to the details of the recommendations, all of that has come. And I'll tell you, we, as a panel, I didn't exactly have shrinking violets with me.
That is true.
And we fought over words and phrases in every part of that report. So unfortunately, this is sort of provoked by Michael Byers, who we asked to come and talk to the panel. A distinguished university lecturer didn't have the courage to come before our panel and give us his views.
Do you know why?
Well, he said because he thought our minds were made up. Well, you know, I guess his was.
I got 20 more questions here I want to ask. We've talked for half an hour and we're out of time. She's giving me the hook here. I never got to ask you about, anyway, next time. John Manley, thanks so much for coming in and visiting us at TVO tonight. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.